Hello, and thank you for having invited me to talk today. I will present a bit, well, the paper I'm going to present is sort of work in progress, so you will see what I'm sort of writing about. And I also would like to extend my gratitude to the organisers of this event. This is quite amazing for bringing us together, to experiment, to play, and to discuss what we're doing today. So over the last few days, we've been looking at traditional STEM methods, techniques I have only experienced as a student, not professionally. I have grown up with ready-made paints. And I always thought that was a thing of the past. Maybe it is not. Maybe it will come back. So over the past 2 decades, I've been deeply immersed in some painting practice. So I've been working at London's theatres. I've worked at Young Vic, Royal Court, Unicorn, National Theatre, so I've gone around freelance. And I've also taught scene painting at London drama schools. So my experience as a scene painter and educator is an essential foundation that shapes my research and historical scene painting. So to me, scene painting is not is a profession and a historical study at the same time. And I approach this through the practitioner-researcher lens. This is a concept within a broader framework of practices research. To paraphrase Robin Nelson, who has extensively written about the subject, Practices Research Initiative is an approach that is evolving to be bridging a gap between theory and practice. This duality in bringing together knowledge from different disciplines and sharing of knowledge to understand scene painting practice better is my aim. Scene painting has deep roots and over time has accumulated a toolkit of materials and saying associated with the profession. Still, this toolkit needs to be relevant to people doing it now as well as sort of in the past. It does not survive for its own sake. Practical knowledge has to be relevant. It has to have purpose in today's world. And what I can say certainly, because I am a practitioner in the 21st century, is that the craft is alive. Here I'm drawing on writings of Richard Sennett, a psychologist and former cellist, and Glenn Adamson, a curator, writer, and historian. Both authors have a long-standing interest in craft from a physical aspect to the historical context. So Adamson, in Invention of Craft, highlights the strong narrative of a loss, often association with the advent of modernity. Contrary to this narrative, Adamson argues that skills were not in decline in the mid-19th century. On the contrary, craft was the order of the day. In A Craftsman, Sennett talks about transmission, and he notes, we would err to imagine that because traditional craft communities pass on skills from generation to generation, the skills they pass on have been rigidly fixed. Not at all. Sennett links this to ancient pottery making and the introduction of the rotating disc, noting that this was a radical change, but a radical change that happened very slowly. When I look at British scene painting practice over a period of the last 100 years, I see shifts and continuations of practices. Some shifts are major, such as the separation of design and realization of making scenery. Other shifts are much more subtle, so the introduction of ready-made paints, for example. Shifts or transitions in practice are necessary for a craft practice to evolve. And Sennett points out, in the history of handcraft, closed knowledge systems tend to have a very, very short lifespan. Scene painting, however, has been around for a while. So in this paper, I will draw your attention to aspects of continuity in scene painting that have followed us around for at least 100 years. I will look at 2 sayings, one from scene painter Joseph Harker, which I'm glad has been covered quite a bit, and the other one is from William Lewis Taylor. And my last one will be a historical tool, and I have picked the flop. examples offer a way into examining scene painting practices which are historical and contemporary at the same time. Yes. So my first one is an anecdote. So anecdotes are quite a powerful concept, and they have gained traction in social science. This is Michael Meyer, who I'm going to quote, and he says, the anecdote should enable us to draw broader lessons, and we can move from the individual to the general. So I'm going to do the individual, and I think I can draw to the sort of more general. This is Mr. Harker in front of his paint job. He has been actually covered a few times today. So just to put into, he worked out of the Warburg Road sort of from 1905 onwards. Right, so we can have a look at that. So this anecdote is about training within scene painting in the 19th century. So Joseph Harker was born actually in Manchester, and his theatrical ties were strong on both parents' sides. They were both actors. Harker knew from a very, very early age that he wanted to be part of creating the scene rather than in front of it. So here we see him in the studio, painting scenery for the 1914 production of Parsifal. Harker was in his late 50s, and we can confidently say that he had made it at this point. Let us rewind 40 years and look at Harker's beginning before he came to London, making a name for himself. Harker's first steps into scene painting would have been towards securing an apprenticeship. So we are very fortunate, and it has been mentioned before, that he's published an autobiography, Studio and Stage, which he describes his professional beginnings. So before he came to London to train, his mum secured him an interview at the Prince of Wales Theatre in Birmingham. So Harker describes that experience, and he says the old scene painter Bob, who was a member of the old school, was very keen to sort of test his physical strength. Harker would have been about 14 years of age at that time, and he was still evolving sort of physically. Unfortunately, I was not able to trace a photographic image of him as being sort of very young. So, but we are very lucky because Dennis Castle, who has written a book, Sensational Smith of Drury Lane, he describes him basically in his book, and he says he was sort of, Harker was on the leaner side, on the smaller side. So it's not surprising that then the old guy said, right, young Harker, there's the winch, try and wind this cloth up. And that is what he was asked to do. So I'm really lucky because it might have been a winch like this that we can sort of see up there, which is probably quite fitting. Unfortunate for Harker, he was not able to do so. He just had not enough physical strength or leverage. As a consequence, and Harker's inability to wind up the cloth, the old scene painter at the Princes of Wales Theatre was unwilling to take him, and yeah, he didn't get the apprenticeship. My point here is the testing of one's physical strength holds very, very true in today's practice, where we don't have to wind up a paint frame anymore, as I'm so glad that you obviously showed it. It is all like mechanical, you just press the button, right? But it is still quite a very, very physical job. So we still have to carry flats, heavy buckets, scenery, you name it, over very, very long hours. So yeah, it's still physically quite taxing. In this example, Bob, the old scene painter, might have also wanted to show young Harker that this is not a glamorous profession, and it requires a certain amount of strength as well as stamina. Likewise, these types of practical tasks are given to aspiring scene painters because it's also a form of initiation and to ensure that they really pick their profession well. So, though it didn't work out in Birmingham, obviously he went to London to train, and he became, as we have worked out today, he's famous. So, it was fine. But is a good example. So my next example is the oral traditions, or what oral traditions can play in passing on of knowledge and techniques or ways of how we approach large-scale work. So practical aphorisms, upon closer examination, can reveal fundamental approaches to traced through time. I will now turn to William Lewis Tyne, who was a well-known scene painter, who also wrote about scene painting, and he left us a manuscript, which is very nice. In the manuscript, he records his recollection of his life and work, and so William was born in London, and as Harker, he had very strong theatrical ties, and his father was a very famous scene painter who worked at one of the major London theatres, such as the Royal Italian Opera, Covent Garden, Drury Lane, Princess Theatre. So in this manuscript, just giving you sort of a page of it, Tyne Jr. reflects on his father Tyne's mentorship and guidance. And we can see sort of on that page as he discusses sort of the skillful brushwork of his father, picking up the different tones and applying that to the canvas. I have picked out one line because I think it's quite significant from that page, where Tyne Sr. says to his son, "I wish, William, I could fix a bigger brush in your hand. You could never behave generously to the canvas with that small stock. Oh no, with that small one. You have too small stock to work with." So Tyne Sr. comments, tells us something about the physicality, the scale, but also hints about sort of the speed of the work that's done. So I'm going to fast forward to the 21st century, and in the early 2000s, one of my mentors imparted a similar aphorism. He would say, always use the biggest tool that you can get away with when you paint scenery. So when I compare these two sayings, my mentor had swapped the word brush with the more abstract word tool. So reflecting on the word tool, which suggests sort of any other instruments to apply paint to large pieces of scenery. And it is very true. I mean, I can look at my colleagues over there, and you name it, we're using the rollers, the sponges, the feather dusters, the sprayers, whatever it is, you know, it will be used in today's practice. So, in essence, these two sayings are the same. I'm just going to go back to my mentor's saying, and always use the biggest tool that you can get away with, now focusing on getting away with. Focusing on the last three words, an indication that the scene painter always considers how this work is being viewed. Yeah, we do always consider our audience, which is quite important. And paint marks, and again, I'm glad it has been covered before, because I'm going to do it again. But paint marks, they can look really crude. Done. Very crude close up. When we sort of look at it further kind of back, I mean, so I've picked one of Wendy's examples, so thank you very, very much. So when we look at those paint marks, it's sort of very close up, you can see sort of range of greens and reds, right? But it's actually usually hard to tell what we are looking at that time. So when we go out a bit more, you can then see it's a nice representation of a bouquet, you know, flowers, roses, and the artist just has reduced the amount of paint marks. But yet, from a distance, our brains are clever enough to sort of put this together and create a cohesive picture. So what Tyne's anecdote tells us is the forever balancing act in scene painting of scale of the work, the speed in which it is produced, as well as the amount of effort that goes into it. If the tools used are too small for the surface to be painted, it needs to be adjusted. This can be different for each artist, but in Tyne's senior case, it was a 6-inch double-tide brush. So my last example is a physical tool and part of a material culture that makes up scene painting practice. This tool can be found in most workshops and is the humble flogger. The flogger depicted in this slide is very simple in its physical appearance. It is made up of a wooden stick, which can be square, and is usually like around a piece of wood. The rounded edges, I would say, are preferred because it's just a bit more comfortable to hold. A row of canvas strips are either stapled on or tacked on. The flogger is used in the drawing up stages and is usually to remove the charcoal off the canvas by sort of swinging the flogger, letting beat the canvas to clear sort of excess charcoal marks. It acts more like a carpet beater. What it mustn't be confused with is a brush called the flogger, which is used in wood greening. Yeah, but it is a different one. This slide, I have picked a video from, which is the painting of the Scottish opera backcloth, in which Kelvin Guy takes us through the different stages of painting a backcloth for the production of Don Pasquale. And I love the fact the flogger just rests on this chair, very, very unassuming. And as a tool, it's been with us for quite some. To be honest, I can't tell you how far it goes back, but it has been with us for at least 150 years. So through the examining of manuals, we can look at its significance in current practice as well as his historical lineage. So, Lloyd's wonderful scene painting book. For instance, in British scene painting practice, the existence and usage of the flogger can be traced back to at least the 1870s, as evidenced by scene painter Frederick Lloyd's in his treatise. A practical guide to scene painting is well known and referenced within scholarly work of the late 19th century, but the manual usually, its content is rarely critically examined or analysis, or there's usually very little analysis of that content. But it reads for the flogger: this implement is employed to clearing away the charcoal after the sketching in, and it is made out of a piece of wood 2 feet long from a broomstick. It's round on one end, nailed about, or you nail about a dozen strips of canvas or calico, each strip being 2 feet in length. And so it's very similar to my description, yeah, and this is 150 years old. Unfortunately, Lloyd's, there are lots of drawings in that book and illustrations. The flogger wasn't one of them. So for that, I turned to a series of articles published in the Journal of Amateur Work Illustrated, which were published between 1884 and 88, so 1884, 1888, titled Practical Scene Painting for Amateurs. Here we see a visual of the flogger. So, and I would argue that both of these historical publications I've just shown you are unfamiliar to the professional scene painter. Because for professional scene painters, such an awareness of their own professional history and the context in which their knowledge is situated remains largely unexplored. Indeed, the flogger serves as a tangible link between historical and contemporary practices, transcending both temporal and geographical boundaries. This is an example that goes back to my roots. So my professional roots are in a German regional theatre, and the flogger was part of that paint shop too. One of my mentors provided me with a scene painting manual, which is this kleine Wörterbuch der Theatermalerei, published in 1976, in which I found a visual of the flogger, or Abschläger, as it is called in German. More so, we can find the flogger in Italian practice. Yeah, they call it Eckert, and I had an email exchange with a a scenic painter who works in Modena in Italy, and she said this is a very, very loved tool, and you know it's used all the time with them. On the right-hand side is my attempt. So for teaching, I sometimes make up these things, yeah, as well. So mine is not quite as beautiful on the right-hand side, but so yeah, they can come in all sort of shapes and forms. And we also find them in, or I've also found them in American practice. So there is the scene painting and research of the scenic morgue by Roy Lockhart. So it's not just a European tradition, it has also then travelled further away. So through the exploration of the flogger, the theme of continuation in practice is firmly materializes within scene painting, and this is what my kind of examples are showing. So yeah, these three examples are snapshots of a very, very complex and evolving practice. And I would say it is very unfair to talk about demise of it. We don't know where it's going to go, yeah, the profession, but it's going somewhere. But what we're going to, I think each generation of scene painters, they negotiate what they're passing on and what they might not pass on, right? But we can see that in the Joseph Parker example, you know, the strength and the stamina is quite a big one. The biggest tool, I think, holds true, and the flogger have sort of not just resonated with me professionally, but also in sort of historical context. And I think it is worth to talk about these material cultures, these oral transmissions, and yeah, just raising awareness of that kind of richness of practice. Because we must not take this for granted. We don't take, well, we didn't talk about it, but also talk about the people who have paved the way. Thank you.